I'm Patricia Shone and I'm a potter and I stay on Skye. I use traditional methods of building, as in for building vessels like throwing and coiling and hand building. And most of the work has some element or some reference to vessels that are used by people, but they're more sculptural in that they're very textural, they're highly textured, and they don't function specifically for food use or liquids. It's the textures that I'm really most interested in, and how the textures in the clay and in the processes that I use relate and reflect to the landscape around Skye, which is very mountainous and rocky. I think the sea probably influences it more than I've realised. But I try not to think about it too much because I don't want to influence it too much with my consciousness. The things that appeal to me as I'm making the pieces and as the textures are developing, I like to allow them to develop in their own way, and then afterwards I see that there are similarities between the structures in the landscape, including the sea and the sand and the shoreline. And the pieces seem to work better that way than if I'm trying to consciously copy a texture that I see. The nature of the clay is that it is the land, it's a collection of eroded particles from the rocks around, and I think that's why the textures that can be achieved with clay are similar to the textures in the hills and round about. And I just love watching the textures develop and grow and seeing what I can do to emphasise them. I use the wheel for a bit of energy, to get a bit of energy into the process. And because it was traditionally used for making vessels, the human element, the vessel element in the work is quite important to me. That it relates somehow to human beings and how they use pots, and also how they live in a landscape and the effect they have on a landscape in terms of buildings, walls, paths. There are old paths around here that people have been walking for centuries that these last few decades are disappearing, and I find that quite poignant, and I want to kind of make reference to that in the work as I work. Raku is a technique that I started using when I came back to ceramics after about a 10-year break. It was quite an easy way of getting back into it because I could make my own kiln. It's a low-firing process. It only goes up to 1,000 centigrade, so it doesn't require great input of fuel. And the results are very soft in terms of the colours, the greys and blacks that are achievable, that I really like. I don't use a lot of glaze. I like the texture, the surface texture of the clay to speak for itself. And it appealed to me just as I think for the gentleness of the surface textures, that it doesn't destroy the clarity of the textures. And the landscape is such a powerful influence. It's not always an easy place to live, despite its beauty. The landscape can be quite domineering and difficult, as with the climate as well. I think it's all part of it. And that's also, I find that just the thought of the people who lived here before, when there was no electricity and no cars and no made roads, and yet people still managed to live and survive here, and I find that very inspiring. It's a combination of the place and the people who are here now and the people who were here before, and me and my place here and my journey here and my journey since I've been here. It's all combines together in the work.